Hello students, welcome to Philobytes. As you can see in this video, we are going to talk about Spinoza. We are going to discuss his mind and body problem, his concept of pantheism, psychophysical parallelism, abstract monism. And as usual, you will find the link in the description box where I have uploaded answers to important questions on Spinoza. So let's begin. Now, Spinoza is best known for his Ethics, a monumental work that presents an ethical vision unfolding out of a monistic metaphysics in which God and nature are identified. He was a moral exemplar and led an ascetic life. He was considered a religious thinker, and the poet Novalis described him as God intoxicated. He was influenced by many of his predecessors, including the Greek masters, the scholastic philosophers, and most importantly, by René Descartes, who presented a picture of reality constitutive of three substances. If you had watched my earlier video on Descartes, you'll be able to understand what I'm trying to say. And understanding Descartes is important in order to understand what Spinoza is trying to do. Now, how Spinoza critiques Descartes is one of the most important aspects of his philosophy. In order to understand that, we must first have a quick recapitulation of Descartes' postulations. Descartes presented a picture of reality constitutive of three substances: the thinking substance, the material substance, and the infinite substance, God. Now, the term substance has a definition. And according to the definition of the term substance, God alone qualifies to be designated in the true sense of the term. Why? Because a substance is said to be that which subsists independently of everything else. But according to Descartes, even mind and matter are substances. But these two are not independent. They are created by God and therefore are dependent on God and are therefore termed as dependent or relative substances. So God alone qualifies to be designated by the term substance in the true sense of the term. The two substances which are dependent on God are independent of each other. How? By virtue of possessing different and opposite attributes, like thinking and extension, respectively. Now, this led to the famous Cartesian dualism, which never could answer how two completely independent and different substances interacted with each other. Now, it is this concept of dependent substance and also one independent substance, which is God, which and the interaction between these three, which is what Spinoza found extremely problematic. He found Cartesian dualism problematic because it had amounted to the removal of God from the world and made God a faraway observer. He discovered that the world, consisting of bodies and thoughts, that is, mind and matter, the two substances, requires a logical explanation for both its existence and its actions. The universe is not explained by a dualistic framework in a number of ways. We could not solve these puzzles without a concept of God, without the idea of a divine oneness of things. Therefore, Spinoza's urgent challenge is to figure out how to restore the close relationship between God and the universe that Cartesian dualism severed. Spinoza therefore begins his analysis of the concept of substance. Substance, ideally, is that which does not depend for its existence on the idea of another thing from which it must be formed. That is, it must be causeless, independent of any other thing. In this sense, it has to be infinite and boundless necessarily. So a substance cannot have an external cause and it can be known through itself alone. So in order to do this, Spinoza has to conclusively prove the impossibility of the plurality of substances. He points out that the existence of a plurality of substances needs to be explained in terms of the notion of cause. However, this idea of causation imposes certain limitations on the substance as it makes the latter a dependent entity. Infinite substance cannot be the effect of an external cause and hence it must be necessarily self-caused. Like God as a substance is self-caused, it is not dependent on anything else. On the other hand, mind and matter, even though they are termed as substances, are caused, they are made by God and they are dependent on God. So they are caused, they are not self-caused like God, neither are they independent but dependent. So what Spinoza is trying to prove here is that plurality of substances is an impossibility because a substance is by definition that which is self-caused and infinite. So because it is infinite, there cannot be many infinites. That is impossible. And that infinite self-caused substance has to be God. In order to prove his point, the method adopted by Spinoza is described as geometrical because in geometry we see that we are given an axiom. For example, the sum of the three angles in a triangle is 180 degrees, and then you have to prove it. So that is already you are proving an hypothesis. It is an axiom which is a self-evident truth. Similarly, Spinoza also first of all defines the term substance, how the term substance should be ideally understood, and then he goes on giving his proof in order to prove that axiom or the definition. So that is why his method is geometrical. According to Spinoza, philosophy ought to employ a comparable approach. He was motivated by the concept of self-evident truth. So this is the self-evident truth, which is the definition of substance, which apparently Descartes did not abide by. So the self-evident truth, he asserts that the existence of a homogeneous and infinite substance, God, whose essence entails its existence, is the most self-evident thing and the one and only substance. So this is his starting point. This is the self-evident truth from which he begins his proof. That is why his method is described as geometrical. Although Descartes and the scholastics also maintained the notion that God is an infinite being or substance, Spinoza contends that both schools failed to grasp the ramifications of their views. The substance must be unlimited as they have contended. However, the idea of an infinite with regard to substance implies that there should not be anything else in the universe. If there were, then it would not be infinite in the proper sense of the word. Spinoza takes off from these assumptions about the infinite substance, that is God, and the so-called finite substances, that is, mind and matter. He affirms that the independent identities of the finite substances cannot be final and absolute. They cannot be absolutely independent of God, who is infinite. Hence, Spinoza argues that they must be in God. So this is how Spinoza established his pantheism, which states that everything in the universe is governed by a set of laws and principles which are immanent in the substance, God itself. These laws and principles are not imposed on the universe from outside, but are inherent in the substance, God itself. Cartesian interactionism to Spinoza's parallelism. The doctrine of attributes plays an important role in Descartes' philosophy, as the notion of a substance naturally calls for its attributes, by means of which it can be distinguished and without which it cannot be conceived. Descartes thus introduces a distinction between mind and body, the two dependent substances, in his scheme on the basis of the doctrine of attributes. And the attribute of mind was thought, and the attribute of body was body or matter was extension. And these two attributes were entirely different from one another, and hence the two substances, mind and also, were also separated forever. Spinoza's treatment of the concept of substance is different, as he refuses to admit a dualistic scheme and envisaged a homogeneous and a single substance. Therefore, his doctrine of attributes too is bound to be totally different. Spinoza starts from the premise that the more actuality or existence an entity possesses, the more qualities it will possess. As a result, the infinite substance has to possess limitless qualities. Thus, the infinite substance is seen as having infinite attributes, each of which expresses the everlasting and infinite essence of the homogeneous substance. We only comprehend thought and extension, as picked up by Descartes, as attributes because of the limitations of our intellect. Owing to its essential finite nature, the human intellect cannot grasp all attributes of the infinite substance. So Spinoza starts with the self-evident truth, which is the definition of the substance. A substance, by definition, has to be infinite and uncaused or self-caused. That is, it is the Vibhu, Ananto or Anadi, Dravya or Vastu. And because it is infinite, it should have infinite attributes like Ananta Dharmakam Vastu, as we shall soon see in the Indian philosophical context. But according to Descartes, we are only getting familiar with two attributes, which are thought and extension, with their modes, of course. So the question is, why are we only able to identify thought and extension as the attributes? Spinoza will say that these are only two attributes which are accessible by our limited and finite human intellect. Since thought and attributes are the attributes of one infinite substance, therefore they are not separate things, but only aspects of the one and the same thing. Not only are thought and extension just two of the infinite attributes which the infinite substance God possess, they are also now understood as attributes of the same substance, one substance. Thought and extension are not two contradictory attributes of two different substances, which Descartes held. Thought and extensions are attributes of the one and the same substance, which is God. He argues that for each mode of thought, a mode of extension will exist like parallel lines. As he puts it, a mode of extension and the idea of that mode are one and the same thing, but expressed in two ways. So, finite minds are the modes of God under the attribute of thought, and finite bodies are the modes of God under the attribute of extension. But they are not in contradiction with one another. There is no duality here because they are all emerging out of the one and only substance, God. So this is Spinoza's mind and body parallelism, which does not involve any problems regarding the mutual interactions between substances, which Cartesian dualism had faced. Now let's understand what Spinoza means by God. The God of Spinoza is not the God of religious traditions, particularly the Judaic and Christian traditions that believe in a personal God and his prophets. He is also against the idea that God does everything for the sake of good. Such a notion is important to the Christian theological conception, which has the dichotomy between good and evil at its center. Spinoza holds a different notion of control and states that God controls the world through natural laws. He affirms that everything in the material world happens through necessity. God is the inner cause of everything that happens in nature, and hence he cannot be different from nature. He is not an external, transcendent cause acting on nature from without, but is the immanent principle of the world or nature. That is, God and nature are one. So, this is Spinoza's pantheism. So that was the briefest possible exposition of the philosophy of Spinoza. In the link given below, you will find answers to important questions related to this topic. I hope you find them useful. So in the next video, we will travel into the world of monads with Leibniz, who is the last of the rationalist philosophers. Till then, bye bye and take care.